Jeremy Fowler of ESPN came out with an article yesterday with Browns owner Jimmy Haslam. In the article, owner Jimmy Haslam talked about he was, quote, perplexed about the disappointing season, but he also was asked about Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski's job security for next year, basically. And he said right there on the screen right here, it says, quote, I do, we do, we're very supportive when asked if he has the right players in place with Stefanski and Berry. I'm going to tell you why I think that's true, and I'm going to tell you the real reason why their jobs are safe. All that and more next. Welcome back to the Real with Joseph Lapin. I am Joseph Lapin. Hope you guys having a great Thursday today. It's cold outside, so hope you're staying warm. If you're here in Ohio, it says it's a whopping 17 degrees where I'm at. um, winter's officially upon us. It's cold outside, and snowing too. So make sure you're staying warm and all that good stuff. But I hope if you're watching from somewhere that is warm, hats off to you. I wish I was there. But no, welcome into the Real. If you're new here, please like and subscribe. Also, on this channel, we just announced this week that we're going to be expanding this to the Real Network, I guess you could say, the Real Media, with other podcasts on this channel. We're going to have The Fix with Dan Malott and Chris Gerganis, a sports betting show with parlays, all based around parlays and fantasy sports and all things sports bettings and all sports. So you guys will love that. It'll be entertaining, debates as well. And then Roundtable sports writer and co-host of the show frequently is Mike Antonese. He'll have his own show called The Professional Fan. It'll be all things NFL, in-depth NFL draft analysis, which will be big this year for Browns fans. So stay tuned to that. And so, yeah, we got some exciting things coming here to the Real. I'm excited for you guys to see it. It's going to be a lot of fun and some great stuff happening. So make sure you subscribe if you want to see that content. And speaking of the NFL draft, the Browns, like I said, will probably have a big draft this April. And there's been a lot of debates whether Andrew Berry should be making those draft picks here in the future. Should Kevin Stefanski be the coach sitting alongside him draft night, right? And so, as you saw there when I said in the open, Jeremy Fowler of ESPN came out with his article yesterday, and he was asked whether or not, you can see there, asked whether he has the right players in place with Stefanski and Berry, and has added, quote, I do, we do, we're very supportive. So basically saying that their jobs are safe for next season. Now, some people have pushed back on this today in the local media, and I'm sure nationally in some spots even. Mainly locally, though, saying that, how could you buy into this? Because Jimmy Haslam, his track record, he said certain things before, and, he ends up coming out and do the complete opposite later on. And I completely get that, especially with 4 games left in the season. They can come out and get absolutely just whopped the last 4 games, and you could say, how would these guys, survive? But the more I thought about this, and when I read this yesterday, and I looked deeper into it this morning, I said to myself, they are, he's right. Their jobs are safe. And their jobs aren't safe because I don't think he believes they're the right coach. He believes they're the right coach or the right GM. It's because somebody else thinks they're the right coach and the right GM. And if you go back to 2016, right? The Cleveland Browns fired Mike Pettin. They cleaned house. They brought in Sashi Brown, or Sashi Brown was made GM basically. And they also brought in Paulie Podesta at that time. Now, on this show, I think it was October 10th, so 2 months ago to this date, almost a little over 2 months ago, I did a show called the San Diego Browns, and I explained why the Browns are the San Diego Browns now, and why Paulie Podesta, in my opinion, has completely controlled the franchise, influenced the franchise rather, um, in some ways controlled a lot of it, and that his vision is what the Browns' vision has been, what they've operated under. And it's, to me, why they've had so much failure since 2016, really since the whole Haslam tenure, but especially since he got here in 2016, why they never had any real success. They made a couple playoff appearances, won the COVID game against the Steelers, lost to a Chad Henne-led Chiefs team. Once, remember, Mahomes went out of that game, Chad Henne came in and still beat us. We make the playoffs last year, which is a remarkable run with veteran quarterback Joe Flacco, who already have won a Super Bowl with Alex Van Pelt still on your staff. And You still get waxed in the playoff game, 45-14 by the Texans, and it's just been disappointing. And you come out this year, the Deshaun Watson trade. He gets out there this year, doesn't look great. Then he has another season-ending injury. You're a 3-win team. You remember 2021 when Baker got hurt. That whole season, how that got mismanaged. 2022, you didn't make the playoffs. After you traded for Watson, he was suspended 11 games. And so it's just been an up and down roller coaster, in my opinion, since 2016. You go to the years before all that, they were 0-16, 1-15, right? It's been an absolute dumpster fire. And because it's been so much chaos and so much, dysfunction and just so much turnover and so much this and that. So a lot of people would say, well, yeah, it's good that they're keeping Stefanski and Berry because we're tired of the turnover. You need continuity, right? That's important, which it is in business and anything, any organization to be successful. You have to have that continuity and consistency. But also, Kevin Stefanski is the 2-time coach of the year. The Browns have made 2 playoff appearances in the 4-year tenure they've been here. So it's probably a good thing we keep him, right? It's just the Watson trade was a bad deal. Once we get the right quarterback in here, we'll be fine. But I don't think Stefanski and Berry are being brought back because, the Haslams actually think that. The things I just brought up that, they made the 2 playoff appearances but yada, 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 and it's all the Watson trade. Number one, I do think Jimmy Haslam was the one that pushed the Deshaun Watson trade. That's number one. But I don't think he was alone in that. I think his right-hand man, who was, I think, Paul DePodesta, was a big, heavy influence in that. And you heard what Albert Beer said. I'm going to play that again in a little bit. What Albert Beer said when they fired Alex Van Pelt back in January, Super Bowl weekend, about Paul DePodesta and Jimmy Haslam were not satisfied with Deshaun's development up until the end of last season. That's why they fired Van Pelt and brought in Ken Dorsey, the more air raid attack. And I broke all that down in that San Diego Browns video. But I believe that the real reason why Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski are staying is because they go along with that vision that Paul DePodesta has sold owner Jimmy Haslam on. And I'm going to show you multiple. I'm not going to do a lot of talking today because I don't really need to. They're going to do all the talking for me. I have multiple clips today I'm going to show you of either Paul DePodesta, Jimmy Haslam, or prominent national reporters, all kind of telling you and showing you who really is in charge and what, one of the biggest topics and debates around Cleveland has been, we don't know what Paul DePodesta's role is. What is his role, right? Many people give many different takes on it, and I got an opinion on that too. It seems to me when you come out and say that Paul DePodesta has heavy influence in the organization, there's always certain people that come back out either in the media or on the internet with some take on it right after and just kind of push. It's almost like a sideways like pushback or in defense of Paul DePodesta that he just gives research and that's all he does, just hand people papers and he's that's it, right? That's all he does. He's not really that involved. But I push back on that. I think that's a bunch of baloney because they've even told you what his job is, what his role is. So the people wondering what does he do that constantly say that we don't know what he does. If you actually put yourself out there in terms of research and look into it and go find a lot of these things I found today, it's pretty clear what his role is and how heavy an influence he has on the franchise. It's not that hard to find, actually. You just actually got to go out and do it and find it. And it's clear as day. I don't, and if you, after watching this video today and all the clips, you don't think you don't know what his role is, I don't know what else I can tell you. So, but let's get to it, right? So where do we start? Let's go back to 2020. Let's go back to when the Browns hired Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski, right? And remember when the Browns hired Kevin Stefanski, they hired him first. They introduced him first before they hired Andrew Berry. So let's start with Kevin Stefanski first. So Kevin Stefanski comes out and has his introductory press conference, right? And I got that clip right here in a second. So he comes out, gives his introductory press conference, and him and Paul DePodesta spoke to media that day as well, and they talked about analytics and what their vision is and all this and that. And so here's a couple clips from around that time and fair use on everything today. Fair use. And these videos are going to be slightly sped up because I got a lot of them. So I don't want to hold you guys for too long. They're not sped up to where you can't focus on it, but it's just slightly sped up a little bit. But you can still understand and hear clearly what they're saying. And, it's just to make it move faster. That's all. So but fair use. So I'm gonna start with which one do I want to start with? I got so many of these clips for you guys today. I got a whole arsenal today for you guys. Let's start with this one. So Paul DePodesta does a radio interview with the Cleveland Browns local radio with the radio network, and here's what Paul DePodesta said that day when he was brought in. Excuse me, when they hired Kevin Stefanski, and this is the next day, rather, excuse me, after the introductory press conference. And if you listen to what Paul DePodesta says here, it sounds like to me he was pretty much involved, pretty involved in the coaching search. And not only was he pretty involved in the coaching search, he was a big part of developing the staff. He was a big influence in a lot of this with the head coaching side of it. So let's hear what Paul had to say. Don't ask me, just ask Paul. Take it away, Paul.
He's done, and you have the introductory press conference with the coach, and that part is done. I know you got lots of big issues here still to go. Is there a sense of relief that we got our guy, and here we go?
I think last night it was more like, let's get to work. The last couple of days were a lot of introductions, even for Kevin around the office, getting to know everybody, both on the football side, the business side. And then we got to introduce him to the community, yesterday. Last night we, hunkered down here and got to work, started working on his staff and some other things we need to do, around the football operation, including the GM search and others. So I think we're excited to finally start moving forward.
Paul, yesterday you talked about great organizations have an identity or a way, the Patriot way, and then you went on to say the Cleveland Brown way. What is that? If you could articulate what we, the Cleveland Browns, hope that is and aspire to have it be.
Yeah, I can't tell you that. That it wouldn't be special. No, it's a great question, and I think it's something that's been building for the last couple of years as we learn more and more about what it is that we can do. I mean, the fundamental question we have to ask ourselves is, how can we be consistently better than our competition? Like, what's going to be our edge, right? And that question can be asked across all different parts of the football operation. Like, what's possibly our edge in the draft? Like, what's possibly our edge when we're talking about free agent players? What's possibly our edge in coaching or in game management? Or there are all these different things, but we have to ask that question. You mentioned the Patriot way, which I referenced yesterday. They've never sort of published what their way is, but from the outside, we can look at it and try to discern, what that is. So it won't be ever something that we publish. And my guess is it's also something that will continue to evolve as we learn things every year. But I think we have a pretty clear vision at this point of what it's going to look like. Now, the GM input into that as well. This will be a collective effort as we put together the vision. But like I said, I think that the foundation of that vision is certainly in place internally, and we're excited to sort of get it rolling.
So listen to what he says there. Number one, he says we a lot. He emphasizes we. He talked about game planning, everything football operationally. He mentioned there, and he says we, and then he says there at the end, we have a vision. Okay, so you already have a vision. Before you hired your GM, you already have a vision. Now, he did point out that the GM would have input, but at the end there, you heard what he says. We already have a vision. We already have a foundation laid here of what we want accomplished. So, in my opinion, that says to me it's his vision. He's the one that's laid down the vision. He's the chief strategy officer. Strategy means strategy. If you don't know the definition of strategy, go look it up. They have a vision and a strategy that they want to accomplish and how they're going to execute as a franchise. And so that day before at the press conference, here's what Kevin Stefanski and Paul DePodesta had to say at the press conference when Kevin was hired.
To me, analytics, I can't say it enough. It's a tool. It's a tool that helps. How does it help on game day? Well, I would meet with some of our people out with the Vikings, and they'd help me understand as we go into this ball game, down and distance-wise, field position-wise, where a defense coordinator may be more apt to blitz. So really, it's something as a play caller was formulating a plan of attack, you start to take in information, and that really was helpful. And I can tell you certain decisions that you make, whether it be for protection or when to run certain plays, you have that in mind, and you have some information that was able to be gathered by that. Compiling that data. So I just think it's another tool when it comes to play calling and personnel. Again, something that the Vikings did, something that I know the Browns do, is it just provides more information. We have so much of this information. We have years of it. So let's use it to our advantage.
So you hear Kevin Stefanski there. I'm going to play Paul in a second. You hear Kevin Stefanski there talking about it's a tool. Right? He even talked about he's using it in the game plan. He's using it on third down situations. The analytics is being used in the game plan. It's being used in what he does, and he said it right there flat out when he got hired. and it's a tool. And he is right. He's right. It is a tool. But how much an influence is that tool in everything they do? And it sounds like to there, we're going to get some other stuff here in a little bit from other stuff that's been reported in the past, how much of a heavy influence it is, that the Paul DePodesta vision, strategy, let's say the strategy, the vision, the foundation that he said earlier, it's heavily influencing everything football operationally. And so here's what Paul DePodesta had to say about hiring Kevin Stefanski.
I think people have a really warped view of maybe what analytics is. I think I maybe have a very different conception than what everybody else has. When I think of analytics, I just think of having sort of frameworks to make decisions under uncertainty. I mean, look, everything we do in these jobs is really built around uncertainty. I mean, what players we're going to take in the draft, what we're going to call on 3rd and 8. I mean, it's all about uncertainty, right? So what frameworks can you create that at least maybe stack the odds in your favor, give you a better chance of being successful? And whether that's drafting a player or hiring a coach or calling a play, it's not necessarily about numbers and spreadsheets. For us, it was this, in terms of what the analytics said about, Kevin Stefanski, my answer would be, this is what our references said. This is the personality testing that we did. This is what the interview process was. Those aren't numbers, or again, spreadsheets or anything like that, but it is the framework we use to try to come up with the best candidate. And ultimately, Kevin checked all the boxes.
Well, what do you do?
I love it. Believe my kids ask me the same question.
Now, really, Pace, now you heard there, he says what their use of analytics was in the process of hiring Kevin Stefanski, what analytics are and all that. Okay, all that's great. I had no problem with anything he said in that past part there. But pay really special attention to what he says here. This is very key.
Because they want to tell people at school, what is it that you actually do? Look, Kevin talked a lot today about a shared vision, right? I think my role really first and foremost is to not only help us create, but also implement that shared vision, and then ultimately make sure that we stick to it, really relentlessly. And that's really my role. So I look at all the processes that are within a football operation. And whether that's hiring someone, whether that's how we do scouting, whether it's how we, look at things, with numbers, I sort of dig into all those processes and make sure that they align with our vision, and that we all as a group, continue to stay aligned and be on the same page as Kevin said.
So information is power. So we like to have a lot of information that informs our decisions. So I think our setup that we have, and meeting with the guys this morning was incredible. I think we're well on our way where we can provide impactful information to our coaches, to our personnel department that can really, again, help the product in terms of wins and losses.
Okay, so a lot of interesting stuff there in that clip. But when I stopped there and I said, pay really special attention to that part when DePodesta spoke about when he was asked straight up, what is your role? He says there, quote, I have a shared vision. And then he said there, I'm in charge of creating and implementing that vision, right? So he tells you right there, he's in charge of creating and implementing the vision that they have, that they all want to be in alignment on. Him, Stefanski, and then eventually Andrew Berry when he was hired. I'm gonna get to that in a second about Andrew Berry. But he said, quote, I create and implement that vision. And he said he's going to stick to it and do it relentlessly, was the word he used. Relentlessly use that vision. And he says, quote, we want someone who aligns with our vision. So Kevin Stefanski aligned with their vision that Paul DePodesta created and is relentlessly implementing in the organization. Now, what is that vision? I think we all know what that vision is. We know what his background is, what he's known for. He's the Moneyball guy. He's the analytics guy. I don't think Paul DePodesta has a background before the Browns and some great drafting in the NFL somewhere, or he was some great GM somewhere. He wasn't. He wasn't in the NFL at all. And so, but he's created this vision for the Browns, and he's relentlessly implementing it, as he says. And so, stick with me now. Let's move on. And let's talk about Andrew Berry now. So remember, they hired Kevin Stefanski first. So when they hired Andrew Berry, actually, no, let me show this first. When they hired when they hired Kevin Stefanski, by the way, when they were looking for a coach, you can see there, if you don't believe that he was involved in the search. Ian Rappaport said the job title for Paul DePodesta, Brown's chief strategy officer, has not changed. But after a few days of mixed messages to candidates from the organization, DePodesta is now the one running the head coaching hiring process for the Haslams. So he was running the whole coaching search. And if I had to guess, he was probably running the GM search as well. When you saw in the radio interview the day after they introduced Kevin Stefanski, he said on the radio interview, he remember I said he emphasized the word "we" a lot. Who we are going to find as GM, right? Because they didn't hire a GM yet. Now the GM search came down to Andrew Berry and Andrew Berry and George Patton. Remember, George Patton was a candidate, and it came down to those two. And Charles Robinson of CBS Sports went on the local radio 92.3 The Fan and shared why ultimately Andrew Berry was hired over George Patton. So here's Charles Robinson via 92.3 The Fan, again, January 28th, 2020, right after they hired Andrew Berry.
Get into that. I want to ask you a question. Was he the guy for the job the whole time? And when you look back at the situation, was this his to win all the way through?
I will say I believe he was Paul DePodesta's guy the whole time. I think that, look, I think George Payton, when he came in, I think the interview in Minneapolis and then the one that happened in Berea, which was really, oddly enough, just sort of the same interview, but on a wider basis with more people. I think that he really did impress quite a few people in the building. And I do think that, look, would he have fit well with Kevin Stefanski? Absolutely. And I think Kevin would have been, more than happy to have George Payton in there. But I also believe that, there was Andrew had his backing in the building, and having the backing of Paul DePodesta made a huge difference for him in the long run. And, knowing that Jimmy was in his corner, and, Jimmy had been in his corner for years, including after he left the franchise, really, I think, was the key to Andrew ending up with this. And the thing with George is...
All right, so you hear there, Andrew Berry was Paul DePodesta's guy all along, and him backing Andrew Berry, Paul DePodesta, had a major impact in who the Browns hired as GM. So in other words, they hired the coach he liked, and they hired the GM he liked as well. And he had a major, major input. In other words, if he co-signed you, you're probably getting hired, because he had Haslam's ear the whole time. He sold Haslam on this vision that he said he's going to relentlessly implement, right? And so let's go back now to 2016 when he was hired, Paul DePodesta. And in 2016, he did another interview with the great Nathan Segura. I love Nathan Segura. Shout out to Nathan on the Browns page here. Again, fair use. And he shares here what his vision is, kind of what, this is back when he first got hired. And let me find it right here. Excuse me 1 second. Here it is right here. And he says some interesting stuff here. Again, this is back in 2018, I believe? No, it was 2016, right? January 22nd, 2016. This is right after he was hired. This is on the Browns YouTube channel. And here's what he had to say after he got hired. And I thought there's something he says later on. I'm going to fast forward to him. I'll play the first part here. I'm going to react to that. And then I'm going to fast forward to later on in the interview when he was asked a certain question. And I thought he gave a pretty interesting answer about how involved he really is with the organization and everything. So here he is. And again, January 22nd, 2022.
Just start from the beginning. Define analytics for everybody.
I think I probably have a very, very different definition than most. For me, analytics is just about trying to use information to help you make better decisions. And that information can come in very different forms. As I was telling people here a little while ago, when we time players in the 40-yard dash at the combine, that's a form of analytics, right? Or when we put together a game plan, or when we're trying to figure out what play to call on 3rd and 8, we use information on what the other team has historically done in those situations. That's all analytics in my mind. It's not always about numbers necessarily. but it is just about information and how best to use it.
And how would you describe your role here as the chief strategy officer?
You know, it's funny, analytics is probably a very small piece of that, you know, although that's what everyone's really focused on. I think that all great organizations, whether they're in sports or even outside of sports, they all do something that gives them a sustainable competitive advantage, some process, some system that just separates them from the pack. And that's really my job here, is to work with everybody, the head coach, the scouts, players, support staff, really everybody, to try to find out and create those processes and ultimately implement those processes that we think that are going to give us that sustainable competitive advantage and make us a good team, hopefully for a long, long time.
So you listen to what he says there in that first part. He talks about how he says analytics aren't really a big part of what I'm doing, actually, even though that's what he's known for. So if you're not using, if you're hiring this guy, Jimmy Haslam, and he's not using his whole job's not based around the full analytics and what he's known for. Like he says it's not a big part of his job. Then why did you hire this guy to begin with? Number one, what's his background and, being this, being hired, when we say, how do I want to say this? What has he done to be hired in this type of position in a franchise in the NFL, to have this kind of role? If it's not just solely based on his analytical background, what he's known for. So number one, I call cap on that. And number two, he clearly does have a big role, because this is when he just got hired, guys. I've never seen somebody as a chief strategy officer in any organization, if they don't have a big prominent role in the organization, why are they being interviewed everywhere? Why after every draft they're out getting interviewed or talking to the media in a press conference? Clearly they're heavily involved. So to say that we don't know what this guy does or how much influence he has on an organization, to me, it's just total BS. There's plenty of other bigger names in the football that had longer history than he does in the NFL that have roles in franchises, but they don't speak to the media ever. They don't get interviewed by the team's YouTube channel. So clearly this guy has a big role. And for him to go up there and say that analytics isn't a lot of what he does, well, he also uses the word processes a lot. And your whole background is based around analytics, bud. So I don't understand how this guy could just walk in and act like he's some football savant, or he's going to give input on all things on football operationally and everything around the building, like he knows what he's talking about, because he has no background in the NFL before this. So everything he does is based around analytics. That's his model. That's what he's known for. That's how he came up in sports industry. So I just don't understand that. And you guys let me know what you think. Maybe I'm wrong, but am I going crazy here about that? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. And so moving on, though, in the interview, let me get my timestamp here. He was asked again more about his position and when he got hired. And I thought what he said here was very interesting. So pay attention to this here.
That I felt like I had to do.
When you decided to come here, at the time you came here, really, you knew Jimmy and D.
Mm-hmm.
I know you knew Alex Shiner, and you knew Sashi, and you knew that you didn't have a head coach yet. There wasn't that traditional talent evaluator in place, and that it was going to be different. So what sold you about this opportunity in meeting with those people? Because I know at the end of the day, it is about who you work with and how that leads to success.
I think you hit it right on the head. I mean, for me, certainly, as I mentioned before, Cleveland and the Browns was a big draw, but my eyes were open in terms of the people, because at the end of the day, look, wins and losses aside, which is what we're all here for, it is about the people you work with on a daily basis and whether or not they inspire you and support you and everything else. And I've been to enough places to know what it looks like and maybe what it doesn't look like,
Sure.
in the wrong spot. And when I met Alec and Sashi and Jimmy and Dee, I just had a great feeling about everybody. There was a real sense of collaboration. There was a real sense that they just wanted to get this right, and they didn't care about who was going to get credit or exactly how we were going to do it, but they really, really wanted to get it right. And I just felt like, geez, this could be really fun to be a part of.
What's been the most exciting part of the first few weeks on the job?
Oh, I think just helping put it all together, meeting with the coaches.
Wait, I'm sorry. Can you say that again? Say that again. Going back to that vision, right? Remember, he created the vision. He's relentlessly implementing it every day. Say that again for me, Paul.
Oh, I think just helping put it all together.
Oh,
you know,
okay.
meeting with the coaches, making that decision, you know, to bring in Hugh. I think the energy and excitement he brings to
Making that decision. Remember, this is back when they were getting ready to hire Hugh Jackson, when they just did hire Hugh. So he just said there, a meeting with the coaches, and he's heavily involved in hiring Hugh Jackson. Nathan Zagura said that. Excuse me, Nathan Zagura said too before this question about how they don't have the traditional talent evaluator in place, right? So does that mean that Paulie Podesta got basically put in that slot around this time, and has he always been in that slot since for almost 9 years now? I don't know. We don't know. And so, but again, listen to what he said again.
I think just helping put it all together. You know, meeting with the coaches, making that decision, you know, to bring in Hugh. I think the energy and excitement he brings to the building, and really just sort of setting the tone for everybody. That was exciting because it's such a big building block in terms of what we want to do, and now trying to, you know, round out his staff too. We're adding people every day. I'm no longer the newest person here.
That's good.
You know, so that's a good thing. But that's really been the exciting part. We're assembling this team off the field that hopefully is going to be a big difference.
All right. So you've talked to the media, you've talked to the head coach now, you helped hire him, you've talked to everybody in this building. But talk to the media, you've talked to the head coach now, you helped hire him, you've talked to everybody in this building. But for the dog,
you helped hire him. So he was a big part in hiring Hugh Jackson. And he explained to you everything what he did there, how he was heavily involved in hiring Hugh Jackson. And he's been heavily involved in all the other hires since then too, and everything in the organization. Right? And you notice what he said, that you helped hire him. And then he mentioned there too, we're working on adding to the coaching staff. This guy's giving this guy's giving input on who Hugh Jackson at that time is going to hire to his staff. I wonder if he had influence on the Browns coaching staff changes this past offseason of 2024. I'll get to that in a little bit. But and then, you know, like I brought up there too, Nathan Zagura talked about how the Browns didn't have a true talent evaluator at that time. It wasn't the traditional talent evaluator. So is this guy the talent evaluator? Was he at that time? Was he the talent evaluator? Was he the talent evaluator from then all the way to now? Is he still the talent evaluator? Or did he maybe lose control along the way when John Dorsey came in the building? And maybe that's why John Dorsey got fired, because John Dorsey didn't want to put up or didn't agree or want to listen to him, because John Dorsey didn't think that guy knew more about talent evaluation than he did. I don't know. It was a topic at that time, though. The great Steve Young, that's right, Hall of Fame quarterback legend Steve Young at that time gave his input on it. Listen to what Steve Young had to say at the time.
His first love is football. And I think that if you're a really bright person, you're going to succeed in things that you do. I don't think it's a bad hire. What's your take?
It's so funny. It's so incestual, the leagues like baseball is, you know, and NFL. And that's why we see coaches that have shown success keep coming back. You know what I mean? Because there's just not very many that people really believe in. And so it's just, you find yourselves retreading things because I think a lot of, you know, teams don't think outside the box. They're not willing to make, you know, take the big chance. But I don't think it's that hard. I think really smart, you know, guys that have managed before, that understand the basics, get a lot. Like, to me, I'm fine with that as long as you have some great football people around him that can say to him, here's the ones that we want, here's the guys that we don't want, and then he can now start to put the team together. The problem is there's no way he can know himself, because you have to have a long-term history. You can't make money as an adult without playing as a kid. I mean, I know I'm wrong. I'm Akeem Olajuwon. I said that a few weeks ago and said, well, what about Akeem Olajuwon? I was like, well, if you're 7 feet and you're really athletic, I think you probably could. But other than that, and so to me, being in another, you know, sport is a risk. But as long as the football guys, the things he's good at, he's going to be good at with the Browns. The things he's been good at before, he'll be good at again, except for, don't tell me that he's now going to understand how to pick the football guy, to know which guy can play. Now, personalities in a locker room, I think locker rooms are similar. Baseball needs leadership. Football needs leadership. Understanding those dynamics of getting guys in the locker room that matter. Mm-hmm. I think that can translate. I could pick a baseball player who could be great in the locker room. I'd be around him. I know that guy. So that part works. But the football part, don't tell me you're going to go pick football players. That doesn't make it.
And I don't know how much you follow the analytics of other sports, but I think one of the reasons why it doesn't seem to really translate to football is for the reasons that you said, the emotions, the leadership, the policing the locker room. It just seems like baseball. I can plug in. I need a guy with a better on-base percentage. We'll get this guy. I need a guy with a better earn-run average. I'll get this guy. Is that why football maybe isn't as stat-driven as the other sports are?
Well, there's not much, very much so. In fact, the ultimate challenge is to try to figure out the algorithms for quarterbacks, like who can actually play the sport, who can actually be good at this, and it goes on. That's the hardest one. But there's no easy ones. There's no right tackle that comes out of Clemson that's going to be the can't miss guy that you really know. You're not really sure. Where baseball has the farm system, and you really have a sense of, who's and the analytics really do prove out. Like, this guy can't hit left-handed pitching, but he can pull the ball. Like, there's all kinds of things that actually fit. Football, it really is. It's an unnatural sport. Like, nobody plays it because it's like, oh yeah, I can't wait to put on the pads and go ram somebody. You have to have there's a purpose, and it comes out of the locker room. And who do you play for, and why? And how am I incented week to week, day to day, to go to work and actually ram other people because of I believe in the Giants, or I believe in Tom Coughlin, I believe in the Mariners, or I believe in my teammates. And so it's all those things. At baseball, it is a more plug and play. Like, a guy's great pitcher in Toronto, he's a great pitcher in Texas. There's some challenges there in the locker room. That's why some of the great teams that figure that out are. But I agree with you, Don. It is completely different in how you put teams together. You can't just plug and play.
A lot there from the great Steve Young, and I agree with all of that. Again, that's Steve Young, Pro Football Hall of Famer, legendary quarterback. What does he know about the game? I don't know. But anywho, two things that stood out to me the most there that he said. Number one was in the first part there, he said, you can't tell me this guy's going to go evaluate talent now. And do we know he was evaluating talent? I got a clip for that in a second, because he says it out of his mouth what his role was there in 2016, going into that 2016 draft as well. Remember, he was hired in January. They had a draft that April. And so then he also says, you can't use some of the same things in baseball that they don't implement into football. And he's right. And the biggest thing that stood out to me what he said there was, baseball has the farm system. You draft guys in baseball that are 17 years old at times, 18 years old, young. You have years to develop these guys and see them in the minor leagues, see how good they are. Football, you're drafted, you're thrown out there right away. There is no minor league system. There's no farm league. There's no in the NFL. You have to be good at picking out talent, knowing who to draft. You have to have a football background, a football education, and knowing who you're picking and what the pedigree of players you need, what type of player you need, how to evaluate that talent truly, because these guys have to be ready to roll pretty soon. I mean, it's rare for guys to come out year one in football to be great, but they got to at least see something. You got to see something in your evaluations. I mean, you look at the draft picks we've had, especially in the last 4 years, just from 2020 to 2024, a lot of those draft picks have been kind of up in there, been up for debate, and even going back to before John Dorsey was here, some of those draft picks were questionable as well, especially in the first round. And so I got a clip here of, again, was he really involved in the talent evaluation back then? And, getting a quarterback. Remember, at that time, we still had Johnny Manziel, that whole thing. And so it was an interesting time. We just hired Hugh Jackson. We just brought in Paul DePodesta. He was hired first. And then their vision, right, and interviewing the coaches and stuff, they brought in Hugh Jackson. And so here's Paul DePodesta and the press conference for the draft. When was this? This was discussed Johnny Manziel and the quarterback. So this is after. It says Cleveland Browns Executive Vice President Football Operations Sashi Brown and Chief Strategy Officer Paul DePodesta talk about Johnny Manziel and the quarterback position. So again, he's up here on a podium talking about what the franchise is going to do as if he's the GM or the guy picking the freaking possibly picking a quarterback in the upcoming draft that year in 2016. He's up here talking to the media as if, hey, I'm heavily involved. This is what my plan is. This is what we're going to do. And so here he is again in 2016 discussing the quarterbacks. Again, at that time we had, like I said, Johnny Manziel and other guys. So a big topic around Cleveland was finding that franchise quarterback. The Browns at that time didn't have one, and still don't to this day. But, that was the big topic here in this part of the press conference. Here's what Paul DePodesta had to say then.
I think it's our role to try to be as exhaustive as we possibly can in that search. And maybe, maybe the solution is closer than we think, or maybe it's in free agency, or maybe it's in the draft, or but we'll be. I think our duty is to explore every avenue and every possibility. For Johnny, he's in.
So everything's a process. Everything has a solution. Sounds very analytical, if you ask me. But again, like you said there, the way he said it there, we're going to look at everything. We're going to evaluate everything relentlessly. We're going to go deep into looking at the quarterback position. This guy is up there talking like he's evaluating the talent. And you go back to what Steve Young said around that same time. You can't tell me this guy can all of a sudden just walk in the NFL and start evaluating football players and evaluating football talent. It's impossible. It's a fallacy. But this is what's been going on in the Browns organization. And this is the guy who has had heavy influence, maybe the most influence under Jimmy Haslam, and it has the biggest influence in Jimmy Haslam's ear. And remember that created vision he created and laid down and sold Jimmy on back in 2016. This is what's ran everything. And so let's fast forward to that 2016 draft, shall we? Remember that draft in 2016? You had Carson Wentz, Jared Goff was number 1 overall. I think the Browns could have drafted Carson Wentz. They ended up trading back in that draft. And so here's what they said after the draft. Here is what Paul DePodesta said after that draft. Again, excuse me for taking a couple minutes. I have so many clips for you guys that I got to pick which one it was that I have queued. All right here. So this is after the 2016 draft, and Paul DePodesta, after they drafted Corey Coleman, we know how that turned out. Wide receiver Corey Coleman in the first round, he says, quote, "It's exactly the way we wanted it to go." You don't believe me? Here he is right here saying it right after they took Corey Coleman that night.
Oh, I think thrilled. I think this is exactly the way we wanted it to go. We got the player we wanted. We were also able to pick up some additional picks, which we're going to turn into additional players. So I don't think we could have dreamed it would have gone better for us. It was a handful of things. I think depending on what happened in front of us, we were prepared to move back. We were also prepared to take a player there at 8 that we liked. We had some good options on the board, but when the opportunity came up to do that, we felt like we still had a really good shot at getting Corey Coleman, which was really our focus from the beginning, and pick up additional picks as well. Sure, I think we're really trying to build this thing for the long term, and a lot of places that we still feel like we can improve on our roster. A lot of interesting players that are still on our board that'll be there not only tomorrow, but we think even through Saturday, and we think we can do a lot of really good things, at least to start to set the foundation going forward.
So again, I might have my stuff mixed up there about that draft in particular. Excuse me for that. But my main point, though, about this, he says a lot of we there. We got the player we wanted. It went exactly how we wanted it to go. We wanted Corey Coleman was the top of our board, right? Seems like it was all collaborative, right? That the head coach, the GM, or not the GM, Sashi Brown and him and ownership, they all wanted Corey Coleman, right? And they want the trade backs and the trade back thing. They traded back to acquire more. Remember that was Operation Stockpile. Let's trade back and get more assets, right? Future picks if we trade back, right? And remember, fast forward to the next year, 2017, in that draft when you had Pat Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, Mitch Trubisky. That was the Myles Garrett draft. Remember in that draft at number 12, they could have had Deshaun Watson at that time, and they chose number one. They could have had Pat Mahomes number 1 overall. Or a quarterback number 1 overall because they still didn't have the quarterback. But remember when they were sitting there, I believe it was the 12th pick, if I'm not mistaken, when Deshaun was taken, and they traded back out of that and passed on a quarterback again. Why do I bring that up? He says there in that clip, we got exactly who we wanted. We wanted Corey Coleman. All right. That's what he says. Well, when Hugh Jackson got fired in 2018, Hugh Jackson did an interview with, I believe it was Mary Kay Cabot, and an article that was written. And in that article, Hugh Jackson talked about some of that dysfunction, how they were not on the same page in those drafts. And if I fast forward down here, excuse me, make this full screen for you guys. I apologize. Make this full screen here. If we scroll down here, remember they said the reason why they fired Hugh is because of the offense was bad. And here, I'm not defending Hugh Jackson anyway. There's some things about Hugh Jackson I think weren't great. But I think some of the things Hugh Jackson pointed out here kind of shows who was really running the show when he was there. And it says right here, let's start with this one. People, quote, people for some reason thought I couldn't run an offense and that I needed to hire an OC. But I was never actually able to run my offense the first 2 years because we didn't have the players. Basically, we didn't have the personnel to run my offense. What everybody saw the first 2 years was not a Hugh Jackson offense. And the people, players, coaches that know me know that was the case. I had to do an offense that was necessary to be competitive each week, and we were. But it was recommended I bring in an OC to allow me to focus on leading the organization in high insight. Or, excuse me, sorry for the ad there. In hindsight, it would have been in our best interest for me to continue doing what got me the job, and that was to run the offense with more talent on board. So he says there we were competitive in a lot of this is the 0-16 season. And he is right. A lot of those games that year, they were competitive in a lot of those games. They just couldn't close the games. But he says that wasn't Hugh Jackson offense because he didn't have the right personnel. And at the end there, he says he wished he would have did what got him the job. Basically, what I think he's saying there is I should have just put my foot down and said, the hell with your analytics, the hell with your strategy and your vision. I'm going to do it the way I want to do it. Let's continue. Going back to the draft now. This is where I really wanted to emphasize. Remember, Paulie Podesta said that, they were all on board. We wanted Corey Coleman. Well, here's what, and going fast forward to the next, you can go to the 17 draft. I'm sure he did the same thing. We wanted to trade back and get David Njoku and pass on Deshaun Watson at 12. And they took Jabril Peppers that year too. We passed on Mahomes in first overall. Well, we could have had a quarterback then. Here's what Hugh Jackson had to say then. After he got fired, we passed on 3 franchise quarterbacks the first 2 years when Wentz, Watson, and Mahomes. We played with a quarterback room with 0 wins in the league. We played with street free agents and practice squad players and receivers. Yet our offense was the same or better than what we were doing this year. There is no way that should happen. You can't pass on quarterbacks. You can never pass on a potential franchise quarterback because you don't know who's going to be there in the future. I think Baker Mayfield is going to be a sensational player if they surround him with the right people. But they've got to give him help and run a scheme suited to his skill set, which I think the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have did all those. We didn't. But anyways, and it says here, Jackson finished by proclaiming that he wanted to take Wentz, but he wasn't able to because the franchise's plan, again, the franchise's plan was to avoid a quarterback and only stockpile draft picks. So, you're telling me that Hugh Jackson, the head coach of the football team at that time, had 0 say. And he wanted a quarterback. He wanted Carson Wentz. And it sounds like he wanted Mahomes or Watson, too. And if I had to look back on it now, yeah, you'd want a franchise quarterback. Maybe not Watson, maybe not Wentz, but, Mahomes would have been nice. But that's just me being a envious Browns fan. But, no. But how did your head coach wants one thing, but the guy who gets the final say, who had the final say, was Operation Stockpile, Mr. San Diego, Paulie Podesta. That's who had the final say. Who also said in the interview earlier he had a relationship with the Haslams already before he got hired, and had a relationship with another gentleman, I can't remember his name, but Sashi Brown and him had a relationship already, and they were all in alignment in this vision, that plan that they said there, right? And so, but he comes out and says, we got the guy we wanted. Well, who's we? Is it you? Because you're still here. Sashi Brown's not here anymore. He got fired, but you're still here. So it's been your vision all along, right, Paulie Podesta? You've been the guy that's implemented this whole foundation, this whole game, this whole vision, strategy, right? It's been your strategy. Okay. Well, has he always been that, had that same control the whole time he's been here? Right? So let's go to John Dorsey now. And remember when they fired Hugh Jackson, John Dorsey and owner Jimmy Haslam went and spoke to the media shortly right after that happened. And here is what the Browns said in explaining firing. Here's what John Dorsey said that day, and Jimmy Haslam, about why they fired Hugh Jackson and Todd Haley.
Did what we thought was best for the organization. I think that we put the organization in a better place today than it was yesterday moving forward, and we're comfortable with the decision.
There were certain things that happened. I mean, from an offensive production standpoint, there was, minimization of offensive production. There were some plays that could have been made that were not made. And I mean, that's a player thing here. But I think right now in the best situation is what we're attempting to do here now is create the best environment moving forward, not only for the players, but for the coaching staff as well. And that's what our sole focus is on right now is the second half of the 2018 season moving forward. And that's what we're focused on.
So what John Dorsey said there is very key to me. Well, number one, Haslam says, we. He says we, like we're all collaborative on this. Okay, we'll see about that. John Dorsey says there, though, our biggest focus should be on creating a good environment for not only the players, but for the coaching staff. And so sounds like to me what John Dorsey's basically saying, without saying it, is I didn't agree with this decision fully. John Dorsey was written that he wanted Todd Haley to take over for Hugh Jackson. That was his guy. And that's written in our article. You can go look that up. But also that this is a bad environment is what he's basically saying for any head coach. Because you have to align with the guy who has created the foundation division and the vision. And if you don't align with him, you're a problem. And you're going to get fired. That's basically what John Dorsey's pretty much saying without saying it, in my opinion. And you can see it as clear as day. So here, let's continue in this video. This is when we'll continue here and then eventually ask Jimmy Haslam about that comment that he made.
This is on.
Hugh was put in a pretty difficult position his first 2 years with the talent we had, and we felt like he deserved a chance at a third year. And unfortunately, it didn't work out the way we all hoped it would.
How frustrating or troublesome is it that there's still talk of dysfunction inside the organization at this point in your tenure? And when John talks about fixing the environment, how do you go about doing that?
Well, hopefully we made a big step today. I mean, it's very troubling. It's hard to win in the NFL. If anybody knows that, it's us. And I think the message today is we're not going to put up with internal discord, that we want people who are collaborative and work together. I think we have to do what we think puts the organization and most particularly our players in the best position to win. And accordingly, we made those decisions. I think, we have made Greg Williams the interim head coach.
All right, we don't need to hear the rest of that. We all know what happened the rest of that season. But notice what he said there, Dan. He and Paulie Podesta emphasize the word we a lot. They say we, and they really emphasize it a lot. You've noticed that. Why is that? And why did John Dorsey have to make that comment where, shout out to whoever that reporter was that followed up. That was a phenomenal job by you, whoever that was. It might have been, I don't want to say his name. I think I know who it was, though. But phenomenal job by you for following up that day on that immediately, because it should have been followed up on immediately, because that was big what he said there, what Dorsey said. And to ask him that too, his response is always, we want to make this it's almost like his response is always, it's bad, it falls on me. He said at times, it's not a good look, and it's bad and all this and that. It's not good. The same old stuff. But then to say we made this decision. We had this vision for this franchise. We have this outlook. That's why we did what we did. But did they really all collaborate on that? I don't think they did. And you remember what happened after this. The Browns go on that offseason. First off, they finished the season a lot stronger. Baker looked like a franchise quarterback at the end of that year. John Dorsey did a hell of a job when he came in 2018, and his first draft absolutely nailed it out of the park and got, Drake, Denzel Ward, Baker Mayfield, I think, is the starting quarterback in the NFL. Nick Chubb. He did a great job coming in immediately and fixing the roster, making them competitive. And they were competitive. They had a better season than what they had. It was considered great compared to what they had the previous years before that in 2018. It was a success. You felt positive about them moving forward to the point where they made a trade for Odell Beckham Jr. that offseason, paired him with Jarvis Landry. They hired Freddie Kitchens as the head coach because they thought there was good chemistry there with him and Baker, and they thought Freddie could be the guy. Now, eventually down the road, John Dorsey, and after that 2019 season where it didn't go well, fell short, and there was a lot of dysfunction still in that building, John Dorsey eventually gets pushed out the door. And why was John Dorsey pushed out the door after all the great things he did? Why was he pushed out the door? Well, let's see why. And I have that video right here of Jimmy Haslam explaining why he let go of John Dorsey.
We had a lot of conversations with John, who's as good a man as, frankly, we've ever met. Tried to find a role for him in the organization that made sense for both, and to end just agreed that it made sense for John to leave the organization, and certainly wish both he and Freddie well. I do think this sets us up well to first hire a head coach and then have the head coach be involved in the hiring of the GM. I want to stress it will not solely be the head coach's decision. It'll be a collaborative process involving ownership and several other members of top management, if you will, as we hire the GM.
So we wanted to give John a different role. So basically they wanted to kind of demote John's power and probably give Paul DePodesta more power, right? And John Dorsey said, I'm out. That's basically what happened. And then he says there, we're going to hire, they already had the strategy was already in place. We're going to hire our head coach first, and then the head coach won't really have much of a say. It's be more of the people involved in top management and who we hire as GM. Basically, we're going all in on this DePodesta plan now, more than we ever have. See, what they did from 2016 to 2018 was this Operation Stockpile, right? And they said, let's get as many draft picks as we can. Let's pass on franchise quarterbacks. Let's go through with this plan, right? Let's see if it works, and then let's bring in a football guy to see if he'll collaborate with us in 2018, which is what they tried doing with John Dorsey. John Dorsey came in, did a pretty damn good job, and then once it got to the point where John Dorsey didn't want to listen to Paul DePodesta anymore, because John Dorsey says, I'm the man. I'm walking around. I got my famous vest and hat and buddy boy. Everybody knows who I am. And his shoes that he used to wear every day. Like, John Dorsey was a brand of himself in Cleveland, and everybody loved John Dorsey. But then once they had the one bad season, with the Odell year and Freddie Kitchens, then all of a sudden it just blew up. Now we want to demote you. We want to, even though you helped build this roster. Now, to be fair, was he the man that picked Freddie Kitchens? That was a lot of report that year that Paul DePodesta wanted Kevin Stefanski, and maybe John Dorsey went with Freddie Kitchens instead. Now, maybe did John Dorsey make a mistake because that person said he wanted that coach, Kevin Stefanski, who is a better head coach than Freddie Kitchens? We all know that. Is that why he chose Freddie Kitchens, just to stick it to Paul DePodesta because he was so irritated with the guy already by that point? Possibly. That's just me speculating. Was he wrong in hiring Freddie Kitchens? Yes, it was a mishire. It was a bad hire. But do I think it was worth John Dorsey getting basically pushed out the door in the organization? Do I think they could have fixed that? Could they have let him fix that with a different coaching hire? I think he could have fixed it. I think he would have been just fine. I think John Dorsey would have been a pretty good executive still, and which he still is a great executive now in Detroit. We know how good they're doing. So I don't think John Dorsey was the biggest problem around that time, and it hasn't been the biggest problem ever. I think it's all about if you don't align with Mr. San Diego's vision, his creative implemented vision that he's relentlessly pushing, right? If you don't align with that 100% fully, you don't play your role, you're out the door. And so if we continue now, how much power does he really have, right? And you remember let's go back to Charles Robinson, shall we? Remember Charles Robinson in what year was this? I believe it was in 2021. Yes. In 2021, all right, this is on WKYC, local channel in Cleveland. Ben Axelrod wrote this article. And no, excuse me, this is around the time when they fired Hugh Jackson. I'm sorry. This is when they fired Hugh Jackson. And so this is in 2018. I messed up my notes there. I apologize. But here's what Charles Robinson said after when they fired Hugh Jackson. To illustrate his point, Robinson pointed to the October firing of offensive coordinator Todd Haley, who many believed would succeed former head coach Hugh Jackson. Okay, this is what I pointed out earlier. Let me clean this up real quick. I'm sorry, I got stuff mixed up because I got so much stuff I'm throwing you guys today. Even I'm getting a little mixed up right now. But let me clean it up for you. So, remember I said earlier John Dorsey wanted to put Todd Haley in as a replacement for Hugh Jackson because Hugh Jackson was not the guy John Dorsey brought in. He wasn't here when he was hired. That was Paul DiPodesta was part of hiring Hugh Jackson. That was basically his guy. And so here comes John Dorsey, and he says, remember Todd Haley was brought in as the OC, and Hugh didn't want Todd Haley. But it makes sense now. John Dorsey's the one that wanted the OC. He wanted Todd Haley because he didn't want Hugh Jackson. And so, like it says there in this article here, I'll put it back on the screen. It was to illustrate his point. Robinson pointed to the October fire of offensive coordinator Todd Haley, who many believed would succeed former head coach Hugh Jackson. Quote, here's what is clear. This is the article about Charles Robinson's writing. Here's what is clear. Haley believed he was in line to step in as the interim coaching job if Hugh Jackson was fired, and got that belief from Dorsey and some of Dorsey's subordinates on the personnel side of the organization. When that didn't happen and Haley was fired, he was completely blindsided by it. Robinson wrote, quote, which means one of the two things, either Dorsey and his subordinates stabbed Haley in the back, quote, and he put parentheses there, which they didn't, and they probably got that from Dorsey himself, or Dorsey was overruled in the process when it came in his chosen interim. I believed it was the latter, with DiPodesta having a more significant hand in the process than anyone realized, and Haslam giving the green light to fire Haley. Boiled down, I think DiPodesta has more power than most people think. What's the end of the quote there? Then more people realize while Dorsey has less. Okay, so there it is. He says, quote at the end there, boiled down, I think DiPodesta has more power than most people think, most people realize, while Dorsey has less. So, what does all this say to me? If you look at all this that I've broken down all the way up until 2020 with the whole John Dorsey situation that we just went through the last number of minutes with all the clips, right? Paul DiPodesta, we go back to when he was hired in 2016, was heavily involved in hiring Hugh Jackson. Hugh Jackson did not turn out to be a great head coach, although Hugh Jackson kind of thought along the way during that process as well that he was getting screwed because he wanted his offense, his personnel, but that didn't align with Operation Stockpile. Then comes along John Dorsey, and John Dorsey did not want Hugh Jackson as his head coach. He had Todd Haley in mind all along. That's pretty clear to me as is written there. Todd Haley thought the same thing, that once they got rid of Hugh, he'd be the interim head coach. But Paul DiPodesta insisted they fire Todd Haley, and so what did they do? They fired Hugh Jackson like Dorsey wanted, but then they fired Todd Haley as well. So basically what Jimmy Haslam did was he pleased both Dorsey and DiPodesta at that time. Why is that? Because there was a clear power struggle between the two, a tug of war rather. And as it says here, at that time, even in 2018, DiPodesta had more power than most people realized. And going back to what I said earlier, I think where John Dorsey messed up in his tenure in Cleveland was hiring Freddie Kitchens solely based because DiPodesta wanted Stefanski. And I think he hired Freddie Kitchens mainly because whoever DiPodesta said, I don't think John Dorsey, he would just automatically just said, hell no, unless it was like Bill Belichick. I think there was a clear, obvious tug of war between the two, and there was a clear, probably disdain in the building, although DiPodesta was never really there. He's always in San Diego. But I think that's where Dorsey did mess up, though, because Freddie Kitchens was not, the hire. Now, again, could a lot of the on-field product be due to how they evaluate talent? Could it be is he heavily involved in the game planning and all the football operations? His influence, has that been maybe a big part in why they've had a lot of downfall and failures at times, like in 19 and all the other ones we can point out, and even this year in 2024, possibly. But it's a lot, man. Man, this is my gosh, the Browns have been an absolute dumpster fire. I get a headache even covering this stuff. But you see there, though, at the end of the article, though, one thing always remains, and that's Paul DePodesta. And so you go to the report today yesterday, about Jimmy Haslam saying Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski's jobs are safe. And the reason why I showed all this history from back then today about Hugh Jackson era, the John Dorsey era, is because, like I said just now, one guy always remains, and that's Paul DePodesta. He's the guy that was here before everybody. He's the one that got the Jimmy Haslam had the vision that he's relentlessly implementing every day, right? And all the guys along the way that didn't go along with that vision, they eventually got axed. They got fired, right? And we can go back to this previous offseason. Why was Alex Van Pelt fired? We see the offense this year with Ken Dorsey, and he got fired last year in Buffalo because their lack of running the ball. And eventually when he got fired and left, Buffalo got better at running the ball, and they started to win games. You look at the Browns running game this year in 2024, it's atrocious. The scheme's terrible. They're constantly in the gun, trying to run from side to side. Your running backs never get a running start towards the line of scrimmage because they're constantly in the gun, never under center mainly. And when they are under center, it's a basic zone running scheme, no gap scheme, no creativeness, no nothing. It's just the running game it's terrible, and it's part of the reason why you're a 3-win team. And it's part of the reason why Jameis, which we already know he's pick happy. We know he's like prone to throw some interceptions, but I think he's throwing more here. Or it looks like a lot here because when you don't have a balanced running game, you're putting more pressure on your quarterback, making him have to throw the ball more. And that's not the formula for Jameis Winston to be successful. For any quarterback, rather. And so, but why would you fire Alex Van Pelt, though, who showed in 4 years in his system with Kevin that they could run a pretty good system with all different kinds of quarterbacks. And you saw that last year with Joe Flacco and the quarterback carousel they had last year when Deshaun got out and, he was injured and he was out for the season. They had PJ Walker in there. They had winning games, beating the 49ers at that time. DTR won a game. I mean, Joe Flacco had that great run. But it was a lot of it was based around Alex Van Pelt, and I think they had a great running scheme still. The first 3 years when he was, you go to 20, 21, 22, 23, they always ran the ball well. Now, Bill Callahan was a big part of that as well, but they always ran the ball well, right? And it seemed like Kevin Stefanski had his offense going. So what changed? And I showed this before. This was from a Tony Grossi article back in 2022, at the end of 2022, where it says Paul DePodesta is pretty much convinced owner Jimmy Haslam that the only way to build a Super Bowl team is by consistently throwing for an explosive plays in the passing game, apparently no matter the weather conditions. Stefanski and Alex Van Pelt will insist that their system is rooted in the running game, but that is only true to the extent that the Browns desired an effective running game. The Browns desire an effective running game, essentially to set up play-action passing game. Eventually, they want those play-action passes to be more frequently laden with deep shots downfield, and that is where Deshaun Watson comes in. The bottom line is Stefanski's job is safe because he is completely adhering to DePodesta's advanced statistics, quote, analytics, or models, and not resisting them. Disagreeing or rejecting DePodesta's research will be Stefanski's quickest ticket out of town. So why is Stefanski safe? Why is Andrew Berry safe? Because they were guys that never had jobs before this, in their 30s, never had, head coaching job, never had their first general manager job. So the Browns and Paul DePodesta, that's exactly what we want. Guys that will fall in line with our plan and our vision and our strategy. As you see there in that article, which I think a lot of stuff I showed today aligns with what was written right there, what Tony Grossi wrote there. If you go against it, you are fired. But why is Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry safe even after coming out of a 3-win season, which probably only finished with 4 at best in the month? Not many coaches and GMs survive this type of season the Browns have had. Why will they survive it? Because they go along 100%. They go along to get along with this plan and strategy that Paul DePodesta has implemented since 2016. And that's why they'll never get fired. They're not going to fire them. Why would they? I'm telling you guys. More on the Alex Van Pelt firing. Here's what Albert Breer had to say about that firing back in January of this year. And I've talked about this at length in the show. I've showed this clip many times. Why not play it again? Because it really goes along again with a lot of the stuff I shared today. Here's Albert Breer back in January of this year. I think it was January 29th.
So in Cleveland, the reason he was let go in Cleveland was because ownership and Paul DePodesta, not Kevin Stefanski, ownership and Paul DePodesta were frustrated with the progress Deshaun Watson had made. I don't think that they really, truly, the people who made that decision really, truly knew his value to that staff. And other people on that staff, not so much Kevin, but people below him, were floored when they fired him for two reasons. Number one, how do you fire the offensive coordinator after you just won 11 games with 4 different quarterbacks, with your 4th and 5th tackles, without Nick Chubb,
including at least 2 or 3 of those guys that nobody's ever heard of, right? I mean, you're talking about Jeff Driscoll, PJ Walker, Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Like, those are some of the guys he was working with.
So you just went through that, right? I mean, so how often do you see teams survive losing 1 tackle, let alone 3? They lost their first 3 tackles for the year.
They usually don't. I mean, look at the New England Patriots this year. You really had no tackles. There's no tackle depth. There's no tackle depth across the league, period.
Yeah. And he was able to help build an offense that was able to sustain with Joe Flacco coming off the couch, with their 4th and 5th tackles, without Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt coming back in. So there's that. Like, that I think is one reason why people there were floored that he got fired. The other one I think is the real key, though. He was the glue of that staff. Kevin, if you know him, he's a great guy. He's not the most outgoing guy. You know, he's just sort of like his personality is very dry. He's got a good sense of humor, but he's not like this outwardly gregarious guy. Alex was the one that held that staff together. When guys were coming out, when guys were going in, he is a guy who was a unifying force in that building. And after the year the Patriots just came off of with the state.
So think of what he just said there about Alex Van Pelt. I mean, when you listen to that, and that's like 100 times I played that on the show since October, and every time you listen to it, you just shake your head even more. Just like, how the hell did they fire that guy? I don't get it. But, you know, going back to what I said at the beginning of this show, or earlier in the show, when I brought up about how this guy's heavily involved in everything, especially in the drafting. He's the talent of hype. Remember, he came out and said, we wanted Corey Coleman, right? Let's go to the 2020 draft. Let's go there. This is after they got John Dorsey out of the building, and it was their first draft, the virtual draft. They had the 10th overall pick. The Browns needed a left tackle that year badly to protect Baker Mayfield. And there was 3 other tackles left on the board. One in particular that I'm going to get into in a minute, but the Browns ended up taking Jedrick Wills. Now, Jedrick Wills has been an okay player at times, but he has not lived up to the 10th overall pick. He's been injury prone. His body language at times looks bad. You heard what he said this year in the in the one media interview that really caught a lot of people's eyes. And so here's what Paul DePodesta had to say after they hired Jedrick Wills in the 2020 draft. Here's what he had to say back then.
My biggest regret to date is that we're not all in the building together today.
1 second. Let me start right.
A team that's really focused on best player available. And tonight in the first round, we're obviously very excited.
All right, so I got it right here. Apologize for that. So here's what he had to say after they drafted Jedrick Wills. And again, he's the first guy out there after they draft him, the night they draft him. Man, you see on the bottom ticket of the first round, I don't think it was even done yet before this guy even came out. He's the first guy out there talking after they draft Jedrick Wills. So he's pretty involved in this draft pick. Here's what he had to say.
About what we were able to do, tonight in the first round. When I talked to all of you last week, we talked about, being a team that's really focused on best player available. And I think we ended up in a really fortunate spot tonight where best player available on our board happened to be a position of real need, on our team. So that doesn't happen every year, but we were fortunate that was the case. And, we're thrilled to get Jedrick on our team. We went through a lot of different scenarios over the course of the past week and really tried to prepare for the worst. So we didn't necessarily anticipate that we were going to have any of them to choose from. We had a lot of different scenarios in mind where, that they might not be there, but we also thought there was a real chance that at least one or two of them could be there. I think we were pleasantly surprised that three were there, but we had run through so many scenarios. We definitely thought that this was at least a reasonable likelihood that we'd have a shot at one of the guys we really like. The top one on our board, so that was a pleasant surprise. But that we'd have a shot at one of the guys we really like. We didn't necessarily know that we'd have a shot at the top one on our board, so that was a pleasant surprise.
So he was the top guy on their board. Remind you, he was the top guy on the board. And that's what I'm gonna close up with today. This is the cherry on top. So he was the top guy on their board, right? Okay. So who was still available? How about Tristan Wirfs? Let's just focus on him. Tristan Wirfs was also a tackle that the Browns could have used. Remember, Jedrick Wills played right tackle in college. Let's make sure mic's on. Jedrick Wills played right tackle in college. So did Tristan Wirfs. And Tristan Wirfs played at the University of Iowa, who develops pretty good offensive linemen usually. If you know that background, look into that. Their history with offensive linemen, pretty good. So was Alabama. But Tristan Wirfs was available. Tristan Wirfs, since that draft night, who the Bucs took, this year alone in 2024 is, and you go to PFF, you can look this up for all the people that love analytics, first in sacks allowed this year. 0 sacks allowed in 2024. Since 2020, he's a 3-time Pro Bowler. He was the AP first and second team. He was also on the first and second team for the year in Pro PFF, I think 3 or 4 times, first or second team either year. That's the guy they passed on. They passed on the Pro Bowler who helped win them a Super Bowl. Also, as a rookie, protected Tom Brady as a rookie, and they won a Super Bowl that year. Is still balling to this day and looks to be a future Hall of Famer if he keeps this up, and has allowed 0 sacks this year in the NFL. With a team that has lost Mike Evans, lost Chris Godwin, has had so many injuries and they've been depleted, yet they're 7-6. And yes, they play in a weak division, but they're still number 1 in their division right now. And Baker Mayfield, who the Browns, remember Hugh Jackson said in when the article when he got fired, if the Browns surround Baker Mayfield and do everything right, he'll be successful. Did the Browns do that? No, they didn't. And Baker Mayfield got also kind of pushed out the door in 2021, was out there playing when he shouldn't have been playing. But the Browns already knew what they were going to do. And they knew they were going to move off him. And it's funny how they tried to go back and get the guy, and they went and traded for the guy in Deshaun Watson, who the coach said you should have took back in 2017 when he was a rookie, fresh out of college. You can mold him into the player and person you want him to be, right? You passed on him then. He goes to Houston. He balls out. Now he has the stuff off the field that pretty much ended his career in Houston, with some serious stuff, obviously. So now you want to trade for him. Now you want to bring him to your team after he has all these allegations. Hasn't played football. He took like a year off or something like that before that trade was made. You don't know what he's going to be like, and you don't know what he's going to be like mentally either with all the stuff going on off the field. And then he's going to get suspended for multiple games. So let's not bring the guy in when he's a rookie in college. We don't know. There's nothing going on in his life, like none of the allegations or anything. He's fresh out of college. He's a raw prospect. We can implement him into our system early and develop into who we want him to be. No, let's try to trade for him years later when he has a shitload of allegations. Hasn't played football in a year and a half. And, we don't know what he's going to be like. He's going to be suspended for most of the year. Yeah, let's bring him in then. And how's that worked? Oh, by the way, let's give him the most guaranteed money ever in a contract. Yeah, let's do that too. Let's give him the most money ever guaranteed in a contract. I mean, Hugh Jackson was right about Baker Mayfield in that article. And he was probably right. He was right back then too when they should have took the guy at 12. They could have had Garrett and him that night at 17. not 12, excuse me. When they back in 2017, they could have had him. Or no, I got it mixed up. Excuse me. At pick 12 in the 2017 draft, they could have had Deshaun Watson, and they passed on him. But then years later, let's try to get him after all that bullshit, after the allegations, and let's get him then. That's a strategy, right? And how's that panned out? And how's that gonna affect you from this year moving forward financially? A lot. And so, by the way, speaking of Baker Mayfield and Tristan Wirfs and the Bucks, who's the least analytical team in the NFL according to ESPN this year? The Buccaneers. How's that working out for them? Better than the Browns. They got two players, one we had, one we should have drafted. All the injuries and all the chaos they've had, they're still in the playoffs too. They might win a division. Probably will. Who's the most analytical team in the league? The 3-win Browns. By far the most analytical team in the league. Unbelievable. So, again, of course Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski will keep their jobs. Of course their jobs are safe because until the day they stop going along with the created vision that's relentlessly implemented every day by Paul DePodesta, they will be here. Until then, until they go against it, they're not getting fired. So they found one first-time GM. Because remember, John Dorsey already had coaching experience. Hugh Jackson had been around the league for a while, when they hired him. And he was also a first-time head coach. But I think Hugh Jackson got to the point where he wasn't going to go with him anymore. And John Dorsey didn't want him. But also Hugh Jackson. I don't think Hugh Jackson was the greatest coach. I'm not saying that. But forget Hugh Jackson. Let's look at John Dorsey. Let's use him as an example. He was a GM already in Kansas City. And then eventually when he got to the point where he wasn't going to go along with it anymore, and I think Hugh Jackson did it away. Again, not saying he was a great coach, but Hugh Jackson didn't want to go along with some of that stuff either. Both of them got axed and pushed out the door. Alex Van Pelt, you saw what he said. He insisted their run game, that their offense was rooted in the run game. What happened to him this past offseason? There was a report that Kevin Stefanski didn't want to fire Alex Van Pelt, and I don't think he did either. But guess what? Kevin has no choice. So they go out and find first-time guys, young guys that go with their stuff, and they control. The last head coach who didn't have his contract extension disclosed to the public. Remember they extended Hugh Jackson? They didn't disclose his contract extension to the public either. They ended up firing him that next season. Kevin Stefanski. We just gave you an extension, but we didn't disclose those terms publicly. What's Kevin supposed to do? Is he going to go unemployed? No, he's going to go along with it. But we know what the main problem is in Cleveland. It ain't Kevin Stefanski. It's not Andrew Berry. We don't even know what those guys could really be if they didn't have this guy hovering over them. Who knows what they could be? Who knows? Maybe they are great GMs and great head coaches. We'll never find out who they truly are, though. I don't think. And it is admirable that Kevin Stefanski has won two. I get the two-time coach of the year thing's a little overblown, but it is admirable that he's made at least 2 playoff appearances amid all of this. He's been at least the guy that's been able to manage it the best and push a team and help a team get to the playoffs. I do think Stefanski's a good coach. We don't really know how great he could truly be, though. And same with Andrew Berry. I have more faith in Stefanski than I do Andrew Berry right now. I still have question marks about Andrew Berry. I have question marks about Kevin Stefanski. But again, we don't know how great they'll ever truly be because they always have one person hovering over them. And the moment they go against that, they're gone. So for now, they're safe. They are safe. And so I appreciate you guys for tuning in this long today. It was a deep dive. Again, you know how we do it over here. I like to go deep and really look deep into a lot of this stuff and give you guys kind of more of a different look on what's really going on with the Browns, because I know a lot of fans are frustrated and tired of watching the same old stuff every year. And we constantly get told it's just the quarterbacks. It's a quarterback problem. It's a coach problem. We need a new GM. It's always their problems, but it's never the person that doesn't seem to have any accountability. So, who is also Paul DeBesta is up for a contract extension, and Jimmy Haslam said before the season they want to get that done. And so, I think if there's any chance of saving this franchise, because they have a plan, by the way, too. And I forgot to play this video. I'm gonna end with this. They have a plan. This is when the day they hired Kevin Stefanski. Paul DeBesta spoke to the media, and he talked about how they have a 10-year plan, is what he said. And I believe I have it queued up somewhere. I gotta have this. If I don't, I'm gonna pull it up for you guys. This is incredible what he said. To me, it's incredible because it's like, I hope this isn't true. If I can find it, I don't know if I can find it. I don't know if I even had it queued up, but in this video, the press conference, rather, the day they hired Kevin Stefanski, he talks about how they had like this, they want to coach for 10 years, almost like they have this plan, that vision. Remember that plan and that vision that they talked about. Let me see if I can find it here. In the meantime, though, I have another video. I'm actually going to end with this, but do I have it? Here it is right here. Excuse me, guys. So here is Paul DeBesta he was asked about the constant turnover, right? And again, he kind of says here how long they're playing. It's almost like they have a certain set amount of years they're going to execute this vision, this plan. And so here it is. That day Stefanski got hired. Here's what he had to say about that.
I'm a big believer that there's a real cost to change. Forget about financial costs. There's a cost to turnover. They talked about it in there, the different coordinators that people have had to go through, different people in the building, different philosophies, different schemes. There's a real cost to that. We have to get this right. When we went, when we embarked on this, what was it, close to 2 weeks ago now, we talked about what we're looking for is we're looking for someone for the next 10 plus years. I mean, that's our goal here. That's what we want. And ultimately, if we want to be a championship level organization, which is what we're shooting for, that's what they have. They have coaches that have been in place for a long time. Now we can't jump from, year 1 to year 10, in 2 years. It's going to take a while, but that's really what we're looking for, was someone that we thought could give us some, sustainable success and some real continuity for a long period of time. What was someone who could really be, for lack of a better term, sort of the CEO of the football organization? Especially in terms of his leadership and his ability to bring everybody together, both on the field and off the field. I think that's what we have in Kevin.
All right. So he says there, we want to hire somebody for the next 10 years, right? And that makes sense what he said. You want somebody usually who can be your coach forever. But again, it's his philosophy, his strategy, his vision that he's relentlessly implementing every day. And so it almost seems like, to me, we feel like we got the guy, Kevin Stefanski, that will go along with my vision that I'm forcing on this, hovering over this franchise, forcing down their throat, basically. We got that guy for 10 years. So was Paul DeBesta promised a certain amount of years? There was a rumor it was like a 5-year plan, right? And his contract from that point on, when he got extended in 20, was 5 years. Is he given more years? Does this guy have actually 10 years from 2020? So that means we have 6 more years of Paul DeBesta in this crap we've had to put up with? We'll find out. I don't know. The Browns, my gosh, that's why it takes me an hour and a half to sit up here and break all this down, because it's that much of a mess. There's just so much you have to unpack. It's just like, no wonder why we haven't won anything. I mean, it's truly incredible. And the Browns fans deserve better. And it's a shame. This is what the Browns fans have to keep putting up with each and every year. And I say that as a Browns fan. But I don't got much else to say, guys. Again, go check out my video I did on the San Diego Browns, where I broke all this down intently. Extently, or what's the word I'm looking for? Intently. I broke this down deep.
I think it was about 6 weeks ago.
I don't
I
mean to play
said
this
here.
shit. I'm gonna finish with this though. 1 second. I'm all over the place. It's like the Browns right now. I'm all over the place. But no, go check out my San Diego Browns video, where I went deep into a lot of the stuff too about firing Alex Van Pelt and the offense back in 2 months ago. Check that out. I think this was more of a deeper dive today in the influence on the whole organization as a whole. I wanted to get this out there, and I think it's good information for people to see kind of what I think is the problem and what a lot of the influence, a lot of decision making is in the Browns, and who ultimately is the last man standing. And so, if you like this content, like, subscribe, and share. I'd really appreciate that. It is called The Real. It's raw. You see here today, my production today wasn't like a lot of shows. I don't have this max production, all this stuff. I just go on the fly. I let it rip. That's why it's called The Real. But again, at the end of the day, I'm trying to show what I believe is going on and break it down deep for you guys as fans, to see a different angle of it that maybe you haven't heard of or seen in the mainstream. And so, I'm in with this. This was you guys saw part of it there. I found this today. It's funny. This popped up on my timeline. I never saw this, and I love Michael Ray Guy. Shout out to Michael Ray Guy. I see him at the high school games, calling games and stuff in the local high school, and he's great. This is December 7th, 2015. This is right before they hired Paul DePodesta. And so 9 years ago, this past weekend, this video was made on Cleveland.com. Fair use, shout out to them. And shout out to Michael Ray Guy. But everything Michael Ray Guy said in this video 9 years ago is still true to this day. And it's incredible. And so I'm going to end it here with Michael Ray Guy. And with that being said, make sure you like, subscribe, share all the good stuff. And I'll see you guys in the next one. I'm out of here. But I'm going to let you take it from here, Michael Ray Guy. I'm gone.
I think it was about 6 weeks ago that I sat here after another excruciating Browns loss and told you that until the owner of this football team, Jimmy Haslam, takes ownership for this the way he should and gets this entire thing headed in the right direction, this is going to continue along this gloomy path. Jimmy, we thought, as you told us, you came in here from the Pittsburgh Steelers organization and your minority ownership with a strong idea of how the National Football League needs to work. Well, you've done nothing that even remotely suggests that you had your eyes and ears open with the Rooney family in Pittsburgh. It has been such a failure, Jimmy, and this fan base deserves much better. You can't trick them. You can't fool them, all right? Because everyone here understands the inner workings of what makes success in the National Football League. You've got to find a way to subjugate your ego, put it aside, hire a football-dominant individual who's had success, let him run the football side of the organization, let him make all the decisions, and Jimmy, you've got to roll with that because your way is not working whatsoever. We want to see some opportunity for this path to brighten. It shows nothing of that right now under your leadership, Jimmy Haslam. That's what's got me riled up.